Beneath a dome of artificial starlight, the arena held its breath. The sand, normally disturbed by the rhythmic stamp of clawed feet or the sudden collapse of defeated fighters, lay strangely still. Spotlights flickered in anticipation, sweeping across the towering steel walls and catching on the jagged edges of broken weapons, twisted metal, and dried blood that stained the ground like war paint. This wasn't just a coliseum. It was a theater of domination. And tonight, the curtain was about to rise on something the crowd had never seen before. Jace Ward stepped into the light alone. His boots crunched softly against the grit underfoot, but his movements were otherwise silent. Too trained, too deliberate, too practiced. Even stripped of his military gear and clad only in simple, utility black clothing, he carried the presence of a soldier who had never quite learned how to stop fighting. His face, half shrouded in shadow beneath the edge of his hood, bore the faintest lines of age, but it was his eyes that arrested attention. Sharp, relentless, burning with the kind of pain that could only be earned by surviving when others hadn't. Above him, screens flared to life, projecting his image across the galaxy. Billions watched, from sterile control rooms to grimy cantinas. Each viewer drawn into the theater of this single man standing against the impossible. The Empire had planned it that way. They needed the spectacle. The myth-breaking moment when the last free human soldier was devoured by the monsters they themselves had bred. Except the monsters weren't moving. Across from Jace, on the far side of the arena, the gates loomed like the jaws of some slumbering god. Behind them, creatures the size of trucks and the shape of nightmares waited. Spine, scales, synthetic limbs. They were genetic hybrids built to conquer, bred for slaughter, each one engineered with one singular purpose: to destroy anything the Empire deemed an enemy. And yet they waited. From the commentator's box suspended high above the arena floor, a voice crackled to life. The familiar drawl of Governor Halrex, the Empire's showman of pain and propaganda. Citizens of the inner systems, loyal children of the High Crown. He intoned with oily satisfaction. Tonight you witnessed the end of a myth. The last Navy SEAL, the so-called Ghost of the Rim, will fall, alone, unarmed, forgotten. Jace didn't look up. He knew the cameras were on him, but he wasn't here for spectacle. Not really. He was here because they'd taken everything else. 2 years ago, he'd been part of a deep space reconnaissance team tasked with monitoring Imperial expansion in the outer colonies. What they found wasn't just conquest. It was annihilation. Villages razed, resistance squashed before it ever took shape, and entire populations harvested for experimentation. The Empire's new weaponized species weren't evolving. They were being manufactured, tested, refined. And Jace's team? They'd been the final trial. Only he made it out. He wasn't the best soldier. He'd never claimed to be. But he was the one who crawled away from the wreckage, broken ribs piercing his side, blood soaking into the alien soil, with a single whisper of purpose left in him. Expose them. And now here he stood. A shrill alarm blared, and the arena's massive gates began to rise. The air trembled with the sound of steel grinding steel, and the crowd roared in anticipation. Jace didn't flinch. His heart was steady, his breaths even. He'd rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times. Not to fight. He wasn't here to win. He was here to die right. The first creature emerged. 7 feet tall at the shoulder, with armor-plated limbs and a face like some prehistoric nightmare, it stalked forward cautiously. It wasn't blind rage that moved it. It was calculation, awareness. These things were intelligent, more than anyone wanted to admit. Jace met its eyes. He didn't raise his fists. He didn't run. He simply stood there, exposed, defenseless. And the creature stopped. Halrex's voice faltered. "Begin attack sequence," he ordered, too quickly. Another beast followed the first. Then a third. Soon, the arena center was filled with a half dozen of them, all engineered to tear men apart in seconds. And yet none of them advanced. They circled, sniffed the air, watched Jace with unblinking curiosity. Not one made to kill, because they remembered him, not these specific creatures. Maybe, but the others, those he'd freed. In a classified incident the Empire had buried, Jace had stumbled upon one of their breeding labs. The scientists hadn't counted on a dying human stubbornness. He'd sabotaged the control systems, opened every cage, and vanished into the snow while chaos erupted behind him. Most of the hybrids had been destroyed in the aftermath, but not all, and some knowledge, some defiance, had been passed along. Override their directives. Howard snapped, execute fallback code. But the beast didn't respond. In that moment, something irreversible shifted. Jace stepped forward. Just once. A single, defiant move. The lead creature, a hybrid of lupin and reptilian design, bent its head, not in threat, but in acknowledgement, submission, respect. The arena fell silent for one beat, then another, and then chaos. Security bots descended from the walls, weapons drawn, order scrambled. The Empire's handlers shouted conflicting instructions as the hybrids turned, not on Jace, but on the machines. With terrifying precision, they dismantled the assault drones, one after another, using claws and jaws and brute force. Sparks filled the air, mingling with smoke and the shocked screams of the audience. Jace didn't move. He didn't need to. They were fighting for him now. No, not for him. With him. Above. Howard slammed a fist into the control panel. Cut the feed. Shut it down. But it was too late. The footage had already reached the underground channels. Every colony, every enslaved outpost, every smuggler ship floating in the dark. They were seeing it. A man, alone, unarmed, commanding loyalty from the very monsters meant to destroy him. The narrative had shattered, and in its place, a new one had begun to form. Jace turned slowly, taking in the arena not as a prison, but as a stage. Around him, the hybrid stood vigilant, more than weapons now. They were symbols. And the Empire, with all its control and cruelty, had just lost the one thing it feared most: control of the story. The doors behind him slid open with a hiss. More beasts entered, uncertain at first, but pausing when they saw the stillness at the center, when they saw the man the others had chosen not to kill. Some snarled, some whimpered, but not one crossed a line of blood that had dried at Jace's feet. He was no longer prey. He was a presence. And though he said nothing, every pair of eyes on him heard the same silent declaration. This ends now. In the shadows of the arena walls, one figure watched from behind a mirrored visor. Not a handler, not a loyalist, a defector, someone who'd seen what the Empire was and knew it could not endure. She touched the comm at her ear and whispered, "Begin transmission. Patch this to the Resistance. They need to see what hope looks like." Far below, Jay stood still as a statue, surrounded not by enemies, but by something far more volatile, possibility. And above, the Empire watched the myth they'd tried to bury rise again, not as a man, but as a movement. Years before the arena and its blood-stained sands, there was Earth, blue, imperfect, defiant. The planet stood alone at the edge of the galaxy, a backwater world known more for its stubborn independence than its military strength. But when the Sarlan Empire came, Earth refused to surrender. At first it was a shadow, communications disrupted, satellites disappearing, then entire space stations wiped from orbit without a sound. The invasion didn't begin with soldiers or ships. It began with silence, and from silence, death. Commander Jace Ward had been stationed at Deep Echo 9, a black site buried beneath the Pacific, designed as a last line of defense and ghost command for Navy SEAL operations. It was a place only a handful of people on Earth knew existed. When the first continent fell, Jace didn't receive orders. He issued them. Coordinate resistance, protect non-combatants, sabotage the enemy at every turn. And when it became clear that Earth was no longer waging war to win, but simply to survive, Jace adapted. He buried teams in collapsed cities, snuck operatives behind alien lines, turned skyscrapers into death traps. Every day, he bought Earth more time. But time wasn't enough. One by one, his teams went silent. Not because they failed, but because the odds were impossible. Plasma weapons melted steel. Beasts the size of tanks tore through defenses like paper. Orbital strikes erased strongholds in seconds. Still, Jace endured, because quitting was never part of the training. It had taken 6 months to capture him. 6 long months of night raids, chemical traps, and bleeding under red moons. He was finally caught when he allowed it. When a refugee camp needed an extraction, and the only way to lead them out was to reveal his position. He left behind explosives in the camp's foundations and let himself be taken. When the sky turned black, the camp was already empty. The Sarthans found nothing but ash and silence. They paraded him through their colonies as a trophy. Shackled, starved, bruised, but never bent. The last seal, they called him, the ghost of Earth. They tried to break him, not with pain, but with spectacle. Force him to witness arenas, to see the fate of those who resisted, to sit powerless as whole species were humiliated for sport. But they never understood what truly broke a human. It wasn't death. It wasn't pain. It was forgetting, erasure, and Jace refused to be forgotten. Now, years later, the same warlords who had mocked him sent for him again, not to kill him, but to amuse themselves. They believed he was finished, a relic, a man shaped by a world that no longer existed. But Jace was more than a survivor. He was a memory forged into flesh. And the arena was not a tomb. It was a message waiting to be written. When he had walked into the arena, the conflict had already begun, not between man and beast, but between belief and fear, between the lies the Empire told and the truth one man could ignite. What no one knew, not the audience, not the warlords, was that Jace hadn't entered the arena to escape or to fight for freedom in the traditional sense. He came to confront the thing he feared most, the possibility that everything he'd sacrificed, everyone he'd lost, might have been for nothing. That Earth had died not as a symbol, but as a footnote. He needed to know if there was still something worth protecting in the galaxy, if the fire that had burned so brightly in Earth's final days still had any embers left among the stars. The beasts, standing across from him, were not villains. They were victims, stripped of autonomy, bred for blood. They had no choice but to obey. But Jace saw through them, past their scales, fangs, and fury, to the flicker of life buried beneath centuries of genetic chains. As he stood there, under the swirling lights of alien moons, he remembered their faces. Lieutenant Vega, who died rigging a bridge to collapse beneath an armored column. Petty Officer Lee, who gave up her oxygen so a wounded child could breathe. Chief Evans, who strapped explosives to himself and leapt into an enemy transport to keep it from bombarding a hospital. Names, voices, laughter. They echoed in his mind like a drumbeat that would not stop. They hadn't died to save Earth. They died to prove that resistance, even in loss, was its own kind of victory. This wasn't about revenge. Jace didn't care if the Empire fell. Empires always fell. This was about showing every slave, every spectator, every soul in the galaxy that freedom didn't come from power. It came from the will to stand. The central conflict wasn't just between Jace and the Empire. It was between the soul of man and the crushing weight of surrender. Could one man stand when everything told him to kneel? Could one voice shake the pillars of 1,000 systems? In his silence, he had found his answer. When the arena gates closed behind him, it wasn't a cage. It was a crucible. He knew the Empire expected a fight. A brawl. A last gasp from a fading ghost. That's how they scripted it. That's how they had always won. By controlling the narrative. But Jace didn't give them what they wanted. He gave them what they feared. He gave them stillness. He didn't snarl or roar or charge. He simply stood. And in that defiance, something ancient stirred. The beast began to shift. Not just physically, but something deeper. Something unspoken. They recognized him, not as an enemy, as kin. The warlords watching above scoffed at first, called it posturing, a human trick. But deep inside, a chill ran through them, because they had seen what happened when the oppressed remembered who they were. That's why they had destroyed Earth so completely. That's why they razed libraries, scorched museums, burned languages from memory. Because history, once remembered, becomes rebellion. And Jace Ward was history walking. The moment a combat beast lowered its head, it was not submission, it was recognition. And that gesture, so small, so quick, shattered centuries of control. The warlords didn't realize it, but the fight was already lost. In their arrogance, they'd given the galaxy a stage. And now Jace had seized it. He could feel it in the sand beneath his boots, in the eyes of the crowd, in the rising energy around him. Tension, yes, but also hope. For the first time since his capture, he felt it stir again. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about everyone watching. Every miner beaten for speaking out. Every child forced into servitude. Every soldier who had forgotten what they were truly fighting for. He had their attention. Now came the choice, how to use it. He wouldn't rush it. That wasn't his way. War had taught him patience. A bullet fired too soon misses a mark. He would wait until the Empire made its move. Let them show their hand. Let them reveal how desperate they were to snuff out the light he had just reignited. And when they did, when they brought their greatest horrors to the sand, when they screamed for blood, he would give them something they had never faced before. Not rage, not fear, but purpose. Because Jace Ward had stopped fighting for survival a long time ago. Now, he fought so others wouldn't have to. The arena changed after that moment. Not in its structure, nor in the metal bones beneath the sand, but in the air. It no longer buzzed with bloodlust. It trembled with anticipation, with confusion, with fear. The kind of fear that only comes when those in power realize their power may no longer be absolute. High above, in the controlled tiers, the warlords argued behind polished glass and armored protocols. They debated commands, questioned footage, rewatched the moment the beasts lowered their heads. Their voices rose, trembled, faltered. Not one had the courage to speak the truth aloud. Something had shifted. The silence of Commander Jace Ward had broken more than protocol. It cracked the illusion of invincibility the Empire wore like skin. Back on the sand, Jace didn't move. He had no reason to. The beasts still watched him, coiled in stillness. Each breath from their massive lungs echoed like a drumbeat against the walls of the Colosseum. A thin wind stirred grains of dust around his boots, but he held steady, not out of pride, not defiance for its own sake, but because he understood something the warlords never would. Patience is a weapon. In his SEAL days, patience had saved more lives than bullets. He'd learned to lie motionless for 36 hours inside a jungle crawl space to eliminate a single warlord. He'd once waited a full day underwater, breathing through a reed, to ambush a patrol along a riverbank. You learn in the stillness to read more than footsteps or heartbeats. You learn to hear intent. Now, in this manufactured Colosseum, surrounded by beasts bred for destruction and a galaxy conditioned for fear, Jace was listening again. And what he heard was hesitation. The warlords couldn't leave the moment unchallenged. Their empire depended on control, not just of systems and armies, but of stories. Spectacle. If one man could enter the arena and not die, if one beast could hesitate, the myth unraveled. And so they responded as all tyrants do when challenged. They escalated. New gates rumbled open, not the ones where combatants typically entered, but the sealed ones, kept shut for years, perhaps longer, doors etched with warnings in dead languages. This was no longer entertainment. It was suppression. A creature emerged. No, not a creature. Something worse. It moved like it had never been allowed to move freely before. Its limbs were asymmetrical, dragging behind it metal restraints still attached to gnarled bone. Its eyes glowed with a heat that spoke of endless torment. It was no mindless beast. This thing had memory and rage. A hybrid class Omega. A myth, Jace had once been told. Engineered from the worst parts of conquered species. Part Velgrin, part Terran, part unknown. The result of cruelty and desperation stitched together in a lab too deep for daylight. Jace's jaw tightened. He had seen its kind only once. During the final siege of Earth, a broken body, barely alive, crawling through rubble to reach an evacuation shuttle. It had spoken 3 words before it died. It remembers everything. The warlords had created it to destroy. But in doing so, they'd given it what no weapon should possess: history. Now it stood between Jace and the beast that had refused to fight. It snarled, a sound like metal tearing through bone. Chains clinked behind it like rusted ghosts. And in its eyes, Jace saw not madness, but recognition. It remembered him. The hybrid lunged without warning, all teeth and velocity. But Jace was already moving. Not back, never back, but to the side, rolling low beneath a sweeping claw, drawing the combat knife from his boot in one seamless motion. The crowd gasped as he slashed upward, aiming for the neck. The blade connected, only to snap against the hybrid's reinforced plating. Jace didn't pause. He adapted. Every movement was muscle memory. He ducked under a second strike, sprinted toward a nearby rock outcropping in the arena wall, leaped, hands grabbing the top, feet planting against a stone, and pushed off into a spinning kick that hit the hybrid square in the face. It staggered, not from damage, but from surprise. The crowd roared, not in bloodlust, but in something far rarer: awe. Jace landed hard, knees screaming from the impact, but didn't let it show. He kept his eyes locked on the creature. There was something deeper in its gaze. Not just hate. Hurt. "Who did this to you?" he whispered, not expecting an answer. But the hybrid paused. Only for a moment. It was enough. Jace took a step forward. "Do you know your name?" he asked, his voice low but strong. The creature growled, torn between instinct and something else, a flicker in its scarred, glowing eyes. Confusion. "Because I think you do," Jace continued. "I think they took it. Same way they tried to take mine." He lowered his weapon. The crowd fell deathly still. The warlord screamed into microphones, ordering the hybrid to attack. Electric pulses surged through the creature's collar. It howled in agony, dropping to one knee. Jace didn't move. "They made you into a weapon. But you were someone before that. I can see it," he said, voice trembling with the weight of every comrade he'd buried. Every friend whose identity had been stripped away. The hybrid twitched, caught between the pain in its body and the truth in his words. "They made you forget," Jay said softly. "But they can't take everything. Not if we remember for each other." The creature lunged again, but this time, not at Jace. It turned midair, clawed hand slamming into the arena wall, ripping free a section of exposed wire and metal. The warlord's command link severed in an explosion of sparks. The hybrid landed beside Jace, shoulders heaving, every breath a battle between rage and awakening. And then it didn't move to kill. It moved to stand. The beasts on the other side stirred once more. 2 stepped forward. Then another. Then all of them. The arena's center was no longer a battlefield. It was becoming something else. A reckoning. The warlord scrambled for backup measures. Drones swarmed from hidden hatches in the ceiling, their eyes red, weapons primed. But the moment they descended, the hybrid released a roar so deep it shook the sand. The beasts charged, not toward Jace, but in defense of him. Chaos erupted. Drones fell from the sky, torn apart by creatures once conditioned to obey. The Empire had bred monsters, but forgotten that monsters could choose. Jace didn't lead the charge. He simply walked through it. The hybrid followed beside him, chains still dragging, but eyes burning with something new. Freedom. The beasts tore down walls, exposed the machinery behind the illusion. Fires bloomed where fuel lines burst. The sky above dimmed as interference signals failed. For the first time in decades, broadcasts weren't censored. The galaxy saw everything. Jace reached the center dais, once used by champions to deliver the Empire's slogans, and stood atop it. He looked up, knowing they were watching. Billions of eyes across 1,000 systems. He spoke not in anger, but in truth. You wanted to show. He raised a hand. This is not rebellion. This is remembrance. The words echoed across channels, planets, hearts. In that instant, across the stars, something shifted. Slaves turned toward one another. Warriors laid down their weapons. A whisper rippled through the void. It begins. And far above, in a war room shrouded in gold and fear, the Grand Warlord clenched his jaw and muttered 3 words no ruler should ever have to say. He's not alone. The night sky above the arena burned with crimson fire, a canvas of rebellion smeared across the stars. Where once the Empire broadcast slaughter for sport, now the signal carried something far more dangerous. Hope. From a fractured remains of the Colosseum's control tower, sparks rained down like artificial starlight as systems overloaded and automated drones fell twitching to the sand. But in the midst of that destruction, Jace stood still, the chaos around him forming a strange stillness within. Beside him, the hybrid breathed heavily, its chest rising and falling like a dying engine struggling to live again. The beasts gathered in a circle around them, not as soldiers, not as predators, but as something unclassified, something no chart or hierarchy could contain. They were beings, witnesses, survivors. Jace turned, scanning the horizon. Reinforcements would come. The Empire was vast and relentless. This moment of defiance would not go unanswered, but that had never been the point. His goal had never been to win the war in a single strike. It had been to show that it could be fought. A sound reached his ears, barely a whisper, but unmistakable. A slow, deliberate clapping, mocking in its rhythm, calculated. Jace's hand found the grip of a fallen rifle, but he didn't raise it. He waited. From the shadow of a broken gate walked a man clad in imperial black, a coat of midnight fabric flowing behind him. His face bore the ageless smoothness of those who traded years for augmentation. Silver implants shimmered along his temples, and his eyes, unnervingly human, met Jace's with cold amusement. "Commander Ward," he said, voice like silk dragged over glass. "So, this is a grand statement? A mutiny of monsters and a man with nothing left to lose." Jace didn't blink. "I'd say you're underestimating the monsters." The man stopped 10 feet away, hands visible, but not empty. A thin device, flat, crystalline, hovered at his side. A control interface. One that could summon death with a flicker of thought. "Your performance has been expensive," the man said. "We lost 12 battle-class drones, 3 Omega-class specimens, and, perhaps most costly, a narrative. You've bled us, Commander." Jace tilted his head. "I'm just getting started." The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You misunderstand. This doesn't end with your execution. That would be predictable and ineffective. He gestured toward the creatures behind Jace. They worship you now. Kill you, and you become a martyr. Spare you, and you become a symbol. But break you, strip you down publicly, show them the fear behind your defiance, and we reclaim the story. Jace stepped forward, the movement slow but deliberate. You really think this is about me? No, the man said softly. It's about control. And what's about to happen here will remind the galaxy who holds it. With a flick of his fingers, the device at his side pulsed. All around them, hidden turrets emerged from the broken arena walls. Red lights ignited on the foreheads of the beasts. High-frequency whines filled the air. Control frequencies rewritten, sharpened, lethal. The hybrid staggered. The others groaned, clawing at their heads, eyes glowing too brightly. The Empire's leash had not been cut, only slackened. Jace felt a sick churn in his stomach. He'd miscalculated. No matter what you break, the man said, stepping closer, you're still inside our system, still breathing our air, still thinking inside the cage. The hybrid collapsed to one knee, chain sparking. One of the Velgrin beasts let out a howl of agony, eyes bleeding red, and yet none of them attacked. They resisted. Even now, Jace dropped the rifle. He wasn't going to fight this with bullets. He turned and walked the hybrid, placing a hand against its shoulder. Look at me, he said. The creature trembled. Its body was failing, systems overloaded. Remember who you are, Jace whispered. Not what they made you, who you were before. The man in black laughed. Sentiment? You think sentiment will override neural reprogramming. Jace didn't answer. He just knelt beside the creature, pressing his forehead to the beast's. You saved me. Now save yourself. A moment of silence. Then the red lights began to flicker. One by one, the hybrid rose, slowly, body jerking under internal pressure. The whine in the air faltered. Something ancient and primal within the creature fought back, not just against pain, but against a control that had lived in its very bones for years. It roared, and the collar around its neck burst in a shower of sparks. The others followed. Implants shorted. Turrets locked. Screams filled the control tower above as the command frequencies collapsed. The man in black took a step back, his expression finally cracking. No, he whispered. This wasn't supposed to happen. Jace turned to face him, eyes calm. It wasn't supposed to, but it did. The hybrid lunged, not in rage, but with purpose. Not to kill, but to disarm. In seconds, the device was shattered, crushed beneath a clawed hand. The turrets powered down. It was over. The man fell to his knees, looking up at Jace with a mixture of awe and horror. What have you done? Jace knelt in front of him. I reminded them they were more than tools. I gave them back their choice. All around them, the arena stood quiet. The beasts did not roar. They did not celebrate. They simply stood, free at last, watching a future unfold without the leash of domination. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, across the arena, lights flickered back online. Not Empire red, but blue and gold, the colors of the old Earth Coalition. Someone had overridden the network. A figure appeared on a nearby screen. Commander Zena Rourke, former resistance leader, now face of the unified front. Her eyes glistened with pride. Jace, she said, we saw everything. We're coming. The man in black looked up, disbelieving. You planned this. No, Jace said, but I had faith, and that was enough. As the screen brightened and new signals began to flood the arena systems, broadcasting the revolution to every outer rim world still under the Empire's rule, the hybrid stepped forward. It looked down at Jace, then extended a clawed hand. not to harm, but to lift him. Jace took it. They stood side by side, man and beast, no longer enemies, no longer prisoners, just free. And across the galaxy, where change still hung and silence still reigned, the winds of change began to stir. Quietly, relentlessly, freedom had found a voice, and it would not be silenced again.